Hey, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you're listening from. As I always say, this world is full of time zones all over the place, right? Even the United States, where I am hearing from. You know, parenting is can be a tough thing, right? I tell you this, just like relationship can be difficult, parenting can be difficult. And I don't think that the people always said that it doesn't come with a manual, right? But you grow to understand the thing. It's a learned behavior, as we would say in psychology, right? And I think as you go through the challenges, you learn from each episode, and you become better, and you can tell others how to perhaps, well, you can suggest to them how to raise their children. But there are some persons who are so much of an expert that they can tell you because of the expertise that they have developed over time. And my guest, Jim White, is no exception to those experts who would tell you. But one of the things I'd like to ask him eventually is that the difference between parenting your child, your teenager, so to speak, and grandchildren, because I suspect that we parent grandchildren differently because of that soft spot. Most persons, I'm not a granddad, but I'm sure that, I don't know my grandparents, sadly. I think that's unfortunate. I don't know them, but they died before me. I was born. But yeah, I suspect that we parent them differently. So let's go and chat to Jim and find out what he has to say about some of these issues. Jim, what's up? What's going on, man?
Well, yeah, I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's truly an honor to be here today, and just excited to hopefully share some insights that'll be helpful for your audience.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for coming on Canute Exploration. Your topic in the podcast. I'm Dr. Canute White. But what I'd like to know, who is Jim?
So, just as a little bit of background as to how I
Yeah.
got to be here and where I'm at. I have had, and I would like to say I've been a student of personal development, parenting, and marriage for like 40 years now.
Okay.
But more importantly, I've also spent 40 years applying the lessons learned in my life as a husband and a father to 6 children.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of experience there. I like to use this analogy of a hero's two journeys. I feel like I'm a great example of that. And some of your audience may be familiar with that
We're
idea.
going to go into that, Jim, because I'm going
Yes,
to ask you about
let
that.
me tell you a little bit. The premise is, if you watch a movie or if there's a book, the hero or the main character is going through two journeys. And the first journey is they have a goal or a mission that they're trying to accomplish, or a task, if you will. And that's known as the journey of accomplishment. And that makes, for some interesting story, but what makes the story compelling is the second journey. And what's happening is, as the main character is working to accomplish that outside goal, they're also going through an internal transformation.
Okay.
They're becoming a better person. They're learning or developing new principles, values, and beliefs that make their life work better. And so I like to say I'm an example of that, because as a father to 6 children, you can imagine we had a lot of stuff to do. I mean, there's a lot to accomplish. It's homework and getting the kids where they're supposed to be on time, and making dinner, and there's all of that we did.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of obstacles. In a good movie or book, there's always obstacles that pop up, and we had our share of obstacles along the way as well. Whether it was a homework assignment that was lost, and we all the way up to, we dealt with some learning disabilities with one of our kids.
Okay.
And we had everything from a scraped knee to one of our children that struggled a little bit with drugs and alcohol, for example. So you have all of these different obstacles that you overcome along the way as well. And as we've been married for 40 years this year. And so, as you can imagine, we had some good days and bad days with our marriage as well. But the interesting thing is, as I was going along those 40 years doing all the stuff that a dad of 6 children does, I was also experiencing this internal transformation as well. And it was through my interest and passion for those topics of parenting, marriage, and personal development.
Okay.
And it was just, I was discovering new principles and values that just made our family work better. And I started writing like 20 years ago, and I put together, the idea of, what is a successful family, and kind of, what's that look like? And, our family, while we don't always represent that ideal, we do
Right.
more often than not. And more importantly, when we start to drift away, or if we have something happen, I now have a much better feel for how to get us back on track. And
Definitely.
that's part of it. And so, and then how I got here was, my youngest child is now off in college.
Right.
And so I've just been feeling called to share what I've learned over the last 40 years as a parent.
Yeah.
And so I've put together a book. I've recently published a book on parenting for parenting teenagers.
Okay.
And I formed the Family Enrichment Academy as a vehicle to just share knowledge and wisdom. And whether it's online coaching or courses, and again, the book, I'm just trying to look for ways to share insights and thoughts for people around parenting. So that's sort of the 40-year journey, if you will, in about 5 minutes description there. So
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. But you cannot get away without answering this question. All my guests answer. Tell me about your childhood. Yeah, we're talking about parenting, but what was your childhood like?
What was I grew up, and I have one brother, so one younger sibling. And it was pretty, I would call it just sort of a normal. I grew up, spent a lot of time, right, things that don't happen today. I rode my bike, everywhere and all over the place. I don't know if mom or dad even knew where I was. And this is when I was little. When I was an athlete, I did a lot of athletics, football, baseball, that sort of thing, up and through into high school. So that was a lot of what my youth was consumed with doing, participating in athletics as well. And then I mentioned I've been married for 40 years. My wife and I, we met when we were 15. So it was in high school. So I met my wife, my soon-to-be wife, in high school.
Yeah, right.
And so we had kind of that high school, sweetheart type of a relationship that sort of blossomed there in high school. So my parents, they did divorce when I was in high school. So I've got, that in my background from a child standpoint. Although ours was not a difficult divorce. They were very amicable. They got along okay.
Cool. Yeah.
After, and so it wasn't like there was a lot of tension there, but it's just something that you go through, and it catches you. Yeah, it catches you off guard. I mean, it wasn't something that I had any. I didn't think anything was going on. It was just like all of a sudden, boom, there it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I just spent my time being a kid, at that point.
Cool.
And so it was, it was I feel like it was a good childhood is what I would say.
Yeah. Hey, fair enough. But let us go into this parenting thing now, because it's interesting. The parenting teenagers, and you have been doing some work as it relates to parenting. What are some of the challenges that parents have? What are some of the challenges that you have seen, you have heard that parents have?
Yeah. So some of the more common, the sort of the complaints, I don't call it a complaint. It's like, how do I do this sort of thing? It's, like, how do I get my teenager to listen to me is a common question. How do I get them to, the other side of that is, how do I get them to open up and talk more to me? I think a lot of times parents start to feel a disconnect between them as their young child grows into their teen years. They start to feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Right.
How do I get them to respect me? Is another common concern. So those are sort of the how-to stuff. But then it's I've been hearing more and more questions, as you can imagine, around the topics of like social media. What do I do about social media, and how do what's appropriate there? And then of course you always have the questions around drugs and alcohol. The Saturday, they go out on a Saturday night. How do I help to make sure they're making responsible choices as a teenager? So it's, I hear a lot. That's the kind of stuff that pops up. Friend groups. Maybe they're concerned that their teen is hanging out and has befriended some people that they feel like are a bad influence. That's another common question that pops up. I'm sure it's pretty typical for your audience, anybody that has a teenager.
Right. You know, some mothers who are listening now on their favorite podcast
So
platform, some who are watching would be saying to you, hey, Jim, I love to have a camera when my teenager goes out on a date to see what's going on.
yeah. So, which I guess how I would follow up with, all the different issues, and it's fairly common, those issues that are out there. And one of the biggest sort of tension points or conflict points that I see, and when I work with parents, is there's this transition that needs to take place. When your child is little, the parent tends to control the environment and control what's going on. But as they move into their teen years, I really like to encourage parents they have to let go of that need to control everything and shift to more of an empowerment approach. How can I support and empower the teenager to go out and make the right choice, as opposed to trying to control the situation and control the teenager? And that is a big shift in some cases. And where a lot of the conflict comes in is when that parent holds on to trying to control what the teen is doing. And the teen doesn't, they'd resist that control. And so that's when, there starts to be a lot of fights and disagreements that pop up. And so that's a fundamental component, is making that transition from control to more of an empowerment or coaching type mindset, where you're supporting the teen.
Yeah. And we call that in psychology. Well, in psychology, we learned about a thing called the phases or stages of parenting. And you mentioned some of those phases, right? You have to let go. At one point, you have to let them go, right? And that can be difficult because you have been holding them for a long while, Jim.
Right. And I'm sure you're familiar, and I like to introduce the idea of experiential learning to parents, so that they really, part of it is that teenager has to experience some stuff on their own. They need to start developing their own experience, and then that's how they learn and grow. And if the parent, controls the environment too much, they never have a chance to learn on their own. So that's, I like to encourage parents to think and start to have that in the back of their mind, is, and like we talked about friend groups, or maybe it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend that the parent is uncomfortable with. Well, they try to force them away from that relationship. It only creates conflict. Where what would be better off is if you can help to empower the teen to discover on their own that it's a bad relationship, so that then they have that, that experience, so that later on, when they enter into another relationship, they're able to judge the quality of the relationship because of their own personal experience. But that's a hard thing sometimes for a parent to let go enough to allow their teen to fail a little bit and have that struggle. But that's part of the learning process.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Sometimes you have to be authoritative than authoritarian, and try to. I there's a thing called permissive parenting that you should know about, and it's something I do not much agree with, but it have its place as well in parenting. But authoritative sort of parenting is what I'd like to suggest. What do you think?
Could you say it again? I couldn't quite understand.
Authoritative sort of parenting I'd like to suggest, where the child has a say in sort of a say in, especially as a teenager, in the whole parenting thing. If there are rules, let's sit and discuss these rules. Don't just throw it on them as an authoritarian, but being authoritative.
So you're talking about rules, and and actually that's another one that pops up a lot, is that, the teen is not following the rules or not fulfilling their role within the home. And, it's a transition that has to happen. The way I look at it is, when they're young, again, the parent controls. You got to start giving over more responsibility, but it's not like you give everything over to them right at the beginning. They have to sort of earn that over time. And the idea of like natural consequences, if there's something that they're responsible for, let's say that they're supposed to do their own laundry, for example, and if they don't do it, And then if the teen comes to you with, okay, my clothes are, I don't have anything to wear today because all my clothes are in a dirty wash. Well, the parent can't
Yeah.
rescue them. You have to let them go through that
Responsibility.
consequence.
Yeah.
Right. And they have to then figure, okay, what are you going to do about that? Again, that's when you move more into a coaching mode. And so rather than rescuing them, you say, well, what are you going to do? And you sort of give the problem back to them and have them start to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? Which is a great experience for the teenager as well.
Yeah. Talking about experience though, you might have had difficulty, parenting your children, right? I just like to find out from you what the most difficult um, challenges that you have to deal with as a parent.
Yeah, probably our most difficult challenge, and I think I mentioned that we had one of our kids that had some issue with drugs and alcohol, and it started late in high school and then continued on into her college years, which is still, those teenage years.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to, the challenge is it's hard to know what's the right thing to do, and what's the right response. And one thing, you got to learn to trust your intuition a little bit. And some of it is being able to recognize, part of it is recognizing that there's something not right. And that you need to maybe step in and get more involved. And it's recognizing, how when is that happening? So that's where you got to trust your intuition, because and in some ways you don't want to believe it, right? I mean, you think, well, it's not as bad as maybe it really is. And so I think for us, that was probably the most challenging time for us, was trying to help work through that, which I should say that particular daughter is now an adult with children of her own. She's been able to overcome, and it's all worked out. And it was just part of her journey, which actually is another thing that I like to encourage parents to think about, is that parenting is a journey. And it's ever changing. You're going to always be confronted with new circumstances and situations, and you have to learn and grow as well as a person. The parent does, as you try to help guide your child through it. And so I think that and our daughter going through that, it was part of her journey, but it also was part of ours. When I say ours, my wife and I's.
Right. Yeah.
And for us to be able to learn and grow and be more aware and responsive to those kinds of issues as well. So, but that was probably, I would say, the most difficult thing that we had to deal with, which is a challenge, and a lot of families deal with those kinds of challenges.
You talk about the challenges that you have with that particular child, and the fact that I know that you might have empowered her somehow to deal with this, right? And it's important. But the question I love to ask you: how do you empower teenagers? How do you give that sort of empowerment to teenagers in terms of making them the best, right? The absolute best.
So to me, it's about taking the perspective that the goal is to launch the teenager into their life. And so, that's what the parent's real objective is. How do I get that teen positioned to be able to go off and be successful and live a happy and purposeful life on their own? And when I take that on, that's what moves me more into that empowerment mode, is how do I support them and empower them to be their absolute best? And part of it is I have to turn over that, some of that responsibility to them and shift into that support role. I need to be more of a coach and an advisor, if you will, and help them to grow and learn. And actually, another really big part of it, to me, part of what helps a person accomplish that is that they have a growth mindset. In other words, they're always looking for ways to grow and develop and learn and become a better person. And actually, one of the best things the parent can do for their teen is to model that or set that example. If that parent has a growth mindset, and I'm always working and trying to become a better person, and I communicate that, I'm vulnerable with the teen. I say, you know what? This is new to me too. I'm trying to grow and learn. Let's work on this together. You're sort of teaching or modeling that that mindset of being of growth oriented, and that's a huge benefit for that teen going forward. And then the other thing, so giving them that growth mindset's one thing, but the part of the benefit of turning over some control and allowing them to grow and learn, and you just support them, is you're teaching them how to be resourceful and how to solve their own problems.
Yeah.
And that is, again, huge for them as they go off into their life, to be able to solve their own problems.
Right.
And then I guess the third thing I would throw out is I like to draw this distinction from a mindset standpoint of there's a fear-based mindset and a love-based mindset. And as a parent, if you model and teach your teen to be more love-centered as opposed to fear-centered, that is really going to help them to go out into the world and be successful, and successful from the standpoint of being able to enjoy some peace and joy and happiness in their life, and in a sense of purpose as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you talk about sort of giving them some autonomy somewhere down the line, but that speaks to being authoritative as a parent instead of being authoritarian. But let me ask you something though. Control. A lot of times parents tend to want to have this sense of control, right? Or this attitude, behavior, so to speak, of control over their teenagers. I'd like to find out, how do we deal with that sort of control? Letting go of your need to control your teenager, and you think that is the greatest gift that a parent can give.
Yeah, it starts with self-awareness. I mean, as a parent, you have to start to develop some awareness of where you are from a mindset standpoint, and be able to recognize, oh, I'm trying to control this situation, or I'm over controlling. And then if you can create a pause, that's what, in the moment, you're reaching in, and let's take maybe it's schoolwork, for example. That's an area where sometimes the parents will over control. They'll try to make the teen do homework at a certain time, or they'll be overly involved from a schoolwork standpoint. Well, if you're aware and you sort of catch yourself in the moment doing that, then create a pause. That's the second step, so that you have a choice. And then when you have that choice, you can say to yourself, okay, if I shift to more of an empowerment mindset, how would I handle this? What would I do from more of an empowerment perspective? What question could I ask? Or what is the lesson that could be learned for the teen that maybe I'm taking away by trying to over control this situation? So it really starts from a mindset standpoint, and just creating some awareness of, and to be quite honest, a lot of times when the parent over controls, it's a fear-based mindset, because they're fearful that the teen can't do it on their own. And you have to start to have some faith in that the teen can accomplish and do things on their own, and let go of that fear a little bit. And if they do stumble and fall, that's part of their journey and part of their lesson. So, it's a challenge though. A lot of parents really struggle with the whole idea of letting go of that a little bit. And that's where I say, the first step is awareness, and then trying to create a pause so that you have a choice. You can choose to act differently and approach it differently.
Yeah, you're listening to Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I'm Dr. Canute White, speaking to Jim White. No relationship, but white is white anywhere you go, right? And thank you, Jim. Look, Jim, we just talk about control and letting go of trying to control your teenager. But if the teenager is not talking, you cannot get anything out of that teenager to talk about the challenges that there. Is it that the parent need to step in with this attitude of control, this behavior of control? Well, attitude and behavior is two different things. So this behavior of control, should that be? How do you let them talk?
How do you get them to talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a common thing as well. And which actually, I have a resource that's available for folks. It's 10 questions you should never ask your teenager. And the
Right.
premise is they're like conversation killers. These are the ones, the questions that tend to shut them down.
Mhm.
And then along with that, I have 10 great questions. These are the conversation starters.
Mhm.
But I do think, and it's a free resource. You can go to the website and just, put in your email address and we'll send you, it's a PDF document. And I think that you'll find if you start asking better questions, that's
Mhm.
one way to get them to open up a little bit.
Oh, cool.
And so that's a part of it. And it's also about building connection. Another one of my big fundamentals with parents, especially parents with teenagers, is to be very intentional about trying to build connection with your teen. Because as that teenager grows and matures, they start to want to exercise their independence. They see themselves as a separate person and they start to, in effect, kind of disconnect from the parent. And
Mhm.
while they want to, at the same time, it's a very scary place for that teenager to be. And they want to be connected. But as a parent, you got to make a little bit more effort to build that connection. And
Right.
I'll give you an example. Like one of the
Mhm.
ways that I encourage parents to build connection is by being playful. And
Okay.
so it's a question
Cool.
of how can you build
Love
some
that.
play into your relationship with your teenager. In a simple example from our family, I mentioned my youngest daughter actually is in college, but
Yeah.
she loves music and loves in particular like show tunes, like musicals, right?
Right.
And her and my wife will flip on the iPad or whatever, a
Yeah.
Spotify
Yeah.
playlist, and they'll start playing songs from Hamilton or La
Yeah.
Miz or whatever, and they start singing together, and they just sing and belt these songs out. But if you think about it, it's very playful, is what they're doing. They're having
Yeah.
fun together, and they don't have to be saying anything to each other, but they're building connection.
Yeah.
And that connection, 3 weeks later, if my daughter has a concern about a friend, she's much more likely to open up
Mhm.
because that connection is there. And so that's where I'm saying parents have to be very intentional about building connection. I mentioned the questions, asking great
Yeah.
questions.
I,
Um,
I want to hear those though.
So I'll give you a couple of examples
Yeah.
that can play in. And again, the resource has 10,
Mhm.
but a lot of times a parent will they'll know that their son or daughter has a test, for example, and so when they come home, they'll ask, "Oh, what grade did you get on the test?"
Mhm.
And it's a results oriented question when you say that to the teen, and the teen, it has a tendency to have them, they might get defensive because if the test didn't go as well, or they'll give you that short answer, they'll say, well, it was fine.
Mhm.
They just don't open up as much.
Yeah.
As opposed, you could ask them, instead of
Okay.
saying what grade did they get, you could say to them, was the test a fair test? And by
Mm.
asking if it was a fair test, it gets them a chance to think and to share their opinion a little bit more. So it's not a
Okay.
results oriented question. It's more about what do they believe? What are their thoughts, values, and beliefs, and allows them to share that a little bit more.
Mm.
And that's a way to get them to open up when you
Right.
ask those kinds of questions.
So
So,
Jim, you have 10 great questions and 10 not good questions, never to ask questions.
right.
My thing, if you could sum up each category for me, right? Let's look first at the 10 never to ask questions. Can
Yeah.
you give, sum it up for me?
Yeah, so the summary is that there are questions that are, I call them results oriented, or they tend to promote a yes or no answer. They're closed
Mhm.
in questions. What time did you go to bed last night?
Okay.
10 o'clock. It doesn't promote discussion, and the other thing again is it tends to have the teenager feel like you're questioning their judgment
Okay.
when you ask those kinds of questions. So they're closed ended and they're sort of results oriented, if you will. And on the flip side, the great questions are
Mhm.
open ended questions that tend to allow them to express who they are as a person. What are their thoughts, values, and beliefs? What's important to them? And so you want to ask those more process or open-ended questions that allow your
Okay.
teen to
Yeah.
share who they are, what are their thoughts, values, and beliefs. Because one of the things that what happens is we all want to be heard, right? You want people, you want to know that other people are listening to you
Yeah.
and seeing you for who you really are. And your teenager wants that as well. So asking open-ended questions that allow them to express who they are, what they believe, what they find important and valuable, those will tend to open them up and allow them to express that. And on top of that, it builds connection because they start to feel like, oh, okay, you do have an interest. It's not just about what I can do for you. It's almost what those other closed-ended questions, they feel like
Right.
rather than appreciating them for what they did, you want to appreciate them for who they are. And there's a distinction between what they did versus who they are.
So you're saying the yes no question, those are conversation killers. Those are never to ask question. Yes no. To get that answer yes no, right? So instead of doing that, you're suggesting that ask some open-ended questions. Questions that could generate conversations, detailed conversations.
Yes, absolutely. And ones that allow them, especially the ones that allow them to share their beliefs, interests, their likes and dislikes, that allows them to share who they are as a person too.
Yeah.
That's critical to it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that will create the connection that you talked about. And I like when you talk about, being playful. Sometimes you have to get down to their level to build that connection, right? And to have them believe that you will listen to them when they have a challenge. And that's critical. But here what happened now, Jim. You're a grandparent as well, right?
Right.
Of 12?
Yep, 12 grandchildren. Yep.
12 grandchildren. And I would like to find something out. But before that, I saw a picture that I'd love to show, right? Could you explain that picture to us? Those persons listening on their favorite podcast platform cannot see, but those watching can see. Beautiful picture. Talk to us about that picture.
Yeah, so it's my wife and I there in the middle. We do have some siblings in there as well, but my 6 children, I say siblings, some spouses. There's a few spouses in there, and interesting. One of my son-in-laws is not pictured in this picture.
Oh, okay.
And it was because he's military. He's actually a Marine, a United States Marine, and he was deployed at the time. And as you can imagine, we have children that 3 of them live out of town and 3 of them are in our same hometown. And so it's hard for us to get everybody together.
Yeah, I understand.
And it doesn't happen very often. So this is the most current and up-to-date picture, even though we were missing one. Actually, there's one of the grandchildren. We have a new grandbaby that was born last February that's not in this as well.
So that grandchild is late, right?
Yeah, it was late for the picture.
Late for the picture.
Yeah. So hopefully we can get everybody together again here pretty soon and get an updated picture with all of them.
Yeah, I love that. But look, a grandparent, you and your wife, grandparents of 12, right? It's sort of different in terms of parenting grandchildren in my mind. And I mentioned earlier that I didn't know my grandparents. Based on what I've been hearing from persons who do, it would have been a great thing, a great experience. But you tell me, how do we parent grandchildren? I suspect there is a difference in doing that. But how do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's critical, I think, is to it's not your job to step in and be their parent. I mean, in our case, our son and daughter or daughter-in-law, they are the parents. And part of the role of the grandparent is it's kind of like that control thing again. You got to let go of that a little bit and let them parent. And really your role is one of advisor or mentor. And that's for the parent of the grandchild. And so if they come with a question or, they want some thoughts or advice, obviously we can share that. When we spend time with the grandkids, though, it's interesting. It's easier to be to just be there with them and just enjoy being together. That connection component is really strong, because it's not our role to control, to discipline and to do those other aspects that a parent does. It's just really there to be there. And so what I'm noticing is that you're able to develop and build a really strong bond with a grandchild.
Okay.
And hopefully that evolves into more of an advisor, mentor, coaching kind of a role.
Yeah.
It's not my job to control whether they get their homework done, for example, and get it turned in the next day.
Yeah.
It's just, to be there and to help and to be a support. So, and I think that the hard part is to, it's to manage that. Again, that it's not our role to be the parent. We need to be one step behind the parent in support of what the parent is doing, without doing the parenting by itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But somebody listening now, watching, is saying, hey, but it's our role to spoil that child. Yeah. Talk to me. Are grandparents doing that?
Yeah, it's again, the way we approach it is, we try to not do that, if you will, or to do it with the parents' permission.
Okay.
Like if the kids are over at our house and they're looking around and they come to me and they say, hey, can I have a piece of candy? I just don't freely offer that.
Okay.
It's like, okay, you need to go ask your mom or dad if this is okay to do. Because again, I want to make sure I honor what it is. And there may be a reason that they do or don't want to have their child do something. And part of my role is to honor their role as a parent. Right. And so, but sometimes, and it's interesting, our kids will let us do that some, and let us spoil them a little bit, but always do it sort of with their blessing, if you will.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's an important piece of it. You can, sometimes we'll take care of, we'll babysit, if you will, or we'll be in charge. And so we have to be a little mindful of, okay, we don't want to overdo it or overstep it from a spoil standpoint, but yet it is a different relationship, So, and it's awesome. It's always great. And what, we're enjoying now, as you saw that big picture, is it's cousin time. There's, my daughter's 3 kids and the other daughter's 3 kids hanging out together and developing relationships as cousins. And it's just so cool to watch those bonds form.
Oh yeah.
Because they'll be cousins forever.
Yeah, definitely. Your book though, I want to talk a bit about that, despite time. What are the key strategies you actually taught in your book?
So the book is really centered around 3 key fundamentals, which we've kind of touched on each of them through today. But the first one is around the parent's mindset, and the parent being very intentional about, where they're coming from, whether it was fear-based or love-based, and just being aware, creating some pause, and making a choice about how do they want to proceed forward. So the first fundamental is really working with the parent from a mindset standpoint. The second fundamental is around building connection. And in the book, I've got like 9 strategies for building connection with your teenager. And it's think of it as preventative medicine. The deeper and the more quality you can have in that relationship and that connection, that's going to help the teen and be a great support for the teen as they go out into the world. And then the third fundamental is around having the parent shift to more of an empowerment mindset and letting go of their need to control and fix everything and shifting more to an empowerment. And I provide 10 skills, and they're really coaching skills. How do you coach with your teen and support them? So those are the 3 fundamentals: parents' mindset, building connection, and then turning into more of a source of empowerment for the teen.
As we wrap up, Jim, there's this one question that I'd like to ask. If you could just only give one piece of advice to a parent with a teenager, we know how challenging it can be. What would that advice be?
I still feel like the best thing you can do for your teen is to continue to develop and grow as a person yourself. because you set the example for the teenager. I'll give you a perfect example. Sometimes a parent will say, "Oh, I'm worried about my teenager drinking and driving," let's say. And so my question is, well, always, as a parent, are you drinking and driving? Do you set a good example for them? Because if the parent does, then the teen is more than likely going to follow that, or they're going to have more tolerance for it, if you will, from their perspective. So I think, the parents continuing to grow and learn and develop, and managing their mindset is really the place to start. When it comes to working with your teenager. And the more you do that, then just all of your engagements and the way that everything is sort of built off that parent and them being in a good place.
Great, Jim. I love what you're saying. I know that my audience will learn, a lot from what you've said, and perhaps will make them a better parent. Because most people believe that, okay, fine, I'm good at parenting, but as I've said earlier on, it's a matter of, as we experience this parenting thing, we improve, and that's what you have been saying as well, and that's critical, that we understand that. What are your contacts, Jim? How can people contact you, or get your resources?
So the Family Enrichment Academy is the business. And so the website is familyenrichmentacademy.com. And you can go there, again, get those 10 questions to never ask and the 10 great questions. And I have my email address is listed there, but I'll go ahead and share it. It's jim@familyenrichmentacademy.com. And so feel free to reach out at one of those two places. And it's just, I say it's just an honor to be able to help and serve people and move them along their journey. And it is a journey. And I just love to have this opportunity to share and work with people and hope, and help them to grow and learn and develop. It's just a privilege, and it makes it's very purposeful work for me. I feel a lot of a sense of fulfillment and purpose as I do this with parents.
Thank you, Jim. It's nice talking to you. Jim White on Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast. Thanks for coming. And your website and other links will be in the description of this episode, so others can see. Thanks, Jim.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye. So that was Jim White. Fascinating story, fascinating information, fascinating father and grandfather. And you must go to his website, running across the screen there on our channel. And you are listening on your favorite podcast platform. It's www.familyenrichmentacademy.com. Go there, find ways to contact Jim, and have a talk with him, see some of the resources that are there. And thanks for watching Canute and listening Canute Exploration, your topic in a podcast. Nice being here with you again. Goodbye.